But I think it was Fraser, Peter Fraser, who, more than any of the others of that first Labour government, really understood what was required to make New Zealand a social democratic country. And he could see that it had to be done not just with, socialist rhetoric, but by creating a structure, a cultural and an economic structure, which would, excuse me, which would, in a sense, embed the ideas and make it very difficult for both the ideas and the institutions to be uprooted. And in that sense, he was very successful because it took until the 1980s, and it required at least a nominal Labour government, to have enough public support to bring about the changes for that first Labour government's vision to be finally brought to a close. So, it lasted 50 years. It was 2 generations of New Zealanders. But it was Fraser, I think, who really entrenched the idea of public housing, state housing. It was he who entrenched the whole public transportation system in Wellington, which still operates, which is still there, very much a legacy of Coates and Fraser, because it began in the 20s under Coates. I would say it was more Fraser. Fraser was able to put people in positions where they would be able to do the most good. He made sure that Pliska was dropped in to the Ministry of Works in a fairly senior planning role. So he became the kind of ideas man in the Ministry of Works, and clearly was one of the driving forces behind this big plan for Auckland. But there were others in the housing department at the time who, while they may not have shared all of Pliska's ideas, were nevertheless very much caught up in this modernist social democratic project. You read the literature that was coming out of the government departments, the books that they were writing, the pamphlets they were producing. The National Film Unit was producing all sorts of newsreels about the new planned society that was going to emerge after this terrible war. And some of those clips are just extraordinary to hear. The language, there should be room for sunlight, and wonderful phrases like this, where, it sounds corny now, but, emotion was injected into these projects in a way which you simply couldn't do in a more cynical age like our own. It wasn't just a bunch of intellectuals dreaming stuff up. This was a mood and a set of expectations which was deeply, deeply entrenched in the population. You can't put people through experiences like the Great Depression and World War II and not expect them to come out the other end, desperately hoping, for something better, for all of the sacrifice, all of the bloodshed to actually mean something, And they'd seen the hopes that were generated after the First World War dashed, and they were damned if they were going to see it happen again. And, in a sense, this is why the National Party, even as conservative as it was, it understood that they couldn't go against that. When they tried in 1946, they lost the election. By 1949, they had accepted the basic groundwork laid by Labour in the form of the welfare state. It's just that what they did, particularly in Auckland, which made Auckland grow so huge, was they kept the welfare state, but they gave it an individualistic spin.